I kind of hate doing this video on Patreon because I think that this is a kind of video that ought to go on the public channel. But oddly enough, this apparently milquetoast topic might get me into trouble. I mean, quite apart from the fact that my regular CRP channel has had a strike and I'm not going to be able to post on it until March 31st, March 31st, still 3 months for the stupid Jack Murphy broadcast. Anyway, the point of this video. Unfortunately, I have to post it on Patreon because this topic is incendiary and it's so ridiculous. It's such a ridiculous topic. In this video, I am pointing out the hysteria of our society, how our society has become completely hysterical. I'm pointing out how fear has become a virtue. You might think that that's impossible. I mean, how can fear, feeling afraid, become a virtue of all things? I mean, virtue are those noble, positive qualities that we have. You know, courage, determination, steadfastness, intelligence maybe, learning and all the rest of it. Those are supposed to be virtues, not fear, not feeling afraid. But that's the society we're living in now, where feeling afraid and telling other people how afraid you are is a virtue. Of course, this is a symptom of hysteria, of mass hysteria. It's not normal. The society we're living in now, where people are celebrating the fact that they are afraid of COVID, afraid of this, afraid of that. They're celebrating this fact, this weakness that they are experiencing as a virtue. Well, that points to the fact that our society has become hysterical, and hysterical people will do anything. But before getting into that question, that issue of how far these people will go, we have to understand how this originated. Why is it happening? The why of this is something that I've been noticing for several decades at this point. You see, back in the 1960s, right, with the whole American issue of the civil rights movement and whatnot, and the repeal of Jim Crow laws and so forth and so on. See, segregation, racism, all of these things were considered very negative. And so what happened was that anybody who was the victim of racism, the victim of discrimination, automatically got plaudits. They were lionized as the victim of a social evil, which is, you know, it's understandable. I mean, I personally don't think that somebody who's the victim is necessarily a good person. You can be a horrible person and be a victim, right? I mean, one does not preclude the other. But the point, see, in the 1960s, people who were black, people who were of other ethnic minorities, Native Americans and whatnot, when they were the recipients of discrimination, racism, and all the rest of it, they were considered victims and they were automatically labeled as virtuous. Being a victim over the decades between the mid-60s and roughly the mid-90s, being a victim slowly morphed into a positive thing. Yeah, and quite naturally, people started trying to become a victim. Even though they might be the victimizers, even though they might be abusive and, you know, generally awful people. But precisely those awful people would realize that being considered a victim was a good thing. Because yeah, you know, I'm a son of a bitch, I'm an asshole, but like, oh, poor me, I'm a victim, you know, I steal from people and I fuck people over and all the rest of it, but I'm a victim because I'm Latino, oh, poor me, I'm a victim, and you know, that's how it happened. Being considered a victim became something of a virtue. And so from there, it's only a hop, skip, and a jump to turn fear into a virtue. Yeah, I noticed it's too in the early 2000s where people started focusing so much on safety. I mean, they hadn't focused on safety in the 70s when I was growing up, that's for damn sure. You know, I remember going on my bicycle at all hours of the evening, way past dark, and I was, you know, single digits. I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, and no problem. I'd be off on my bicycle, on my red Schwinn with a white banana seat, you know, going all over the neighborhood with the other kids and having a high old time, right? No problem. Nobody worried about safety. Even though there were child kidnappings and all the rest of it, they were exceedingly rare. They happened, but they were exceedingly rare. And the parents understood the risk rewards. It was more important to have the kid out there playing and exploring the world and developing naturally than to get all paranoid about it, right? But then in the 80s, you started seeing this slow creep of safety. You know, get the seat belt, all right? Seat belt's fine. But then get the safety helmet when you're riding your bicycle, which was sort of like pointless. And of course, the obvious thing happened is that when you have a helmet on, you take more risks. You actually get into bigger trouble when you're wearing a helmet, but that's for another conversation. The point, see, during the 80s, people started wearing helmets. People started worrying about protection. Skateboarders started using elbow pads. I remember I was like, what the hell is the matter with that faggot? Why is he wearing, you know, knee pads and elbow pads? I mean, he's fucking skateboarding, let alone the helmet. What the fuck is wrong with this guy, right? Because when I've been growing up in the 70s, in the San Fernando Valley, there were skateboarders all over the place. And they did it raw, you know, no helmet, no knee pads, no elbow pads, nothing. And they fell and they scraped themselves up and it was, you know, big deal. It happens. But then in the 80s and then into the 90s, more and more safety equipment, and starting to be obsessed with safety and torquing down danger. And then slowly, everything became about safety. In the 2000s, I forget when, it must have been 2007 or 2008 or something like that, I remember chatting with some people online, and I was telling them that I was in Chile, and they asked me, oh, is it safe? Chile is just a regular country just like any other. You know, it's got its problems, it's got its virtues, its weaknesses, whatnot, but it's just an ordinary country. Of course it's going to be safe. Of course it's going to be perfectly normal and ordinary. Crime happens, of course, but it's rare. I mean, like any city in the world. But that was the first question they asked me, these Americans. Is it safe? And it was really creepy. And then the COVID thing happened. And that's when all bets are off. See, because with COVID, all of a sudden, being hyper cautious, hyper vigilant, hypochondriac, really, that became a virtue. That became a virtue. People started, you know, basically giving approval to people's hypochondria. Giving approval to taking all sorts of ridiculous measures. And it was so weird. I remember thinking about it, although I failed to articulate it at the time. I should have known better. But people were all concerned about masking, about having all kinds of safety equipment. I mean, you saw those pictures of grandparents, you know, basically bubble wrapped in plastic, you know, hugging their grandchildren. It was just absurd, right? There was all kinds of that kind of safety. But nothing in terms of preventive medicine, preventive care. It was sort of like, if you got it, there was nothing you could do until you died, you know, which is weird, but okay, fine. You know, that's the situation, and you know, I didn't actually give it that much thought. Only now, lately, I've been thinking about the fact that, yeah, there was no preventive care, but that's for even another video. The point of this video, we saw this development. We saw this development where being afraid was like a good thing. People, you know, said, well, you're being safe, you're taking precautions rather. You're being afraid. That's the thing. People were being afraid, and being afraid was a virtue. I just couldn't believe that. I still, to this day, can't understand it. It's only recently that I realized this truth. Our entire society in the Western democracies is revolving around this new virtue. Fear is the new virtue. In this new clown world, don't be virtuous. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You have to control your fear. Because, let me rephrase this. It's not that you can't be afraid. Fear is an instinctive reaction. And we can't control whether it arrives or not. That we cannot control. But what we can control, insofar as our fear, is we can prevent it from dictating our actions. Prevent fear from influencing our outlook on the world. The world is out there, and it can be a dangerous place in certain circumstances. In other circumstances, it can be exceedingly safe. You can go to, hellholes, and you will find a spot that's perfectly safe and you can be relaxed and easygoing and whatnot. But the point, see, the world can be dangerous, but it's how you confront it that matters. If you look at the world as if you're afraid all the time, the world will dominate you. The world will own you. And you want to guard against that. See, fear can be a powerful ally. Oh yeah, most certainly. Fear can be your best friend if you channel it properly. See, because if you're afraid of something, that can give you motivation, drive, push to achieve its opposite. A simple example. Suppose you're terrified of being poor. Well, lots of people are. I certainly am. I never want to be poor again. I've been poor and I've been rich. Rich is better. Absolutely. And so my fear of being poor drives a lot of my decisions. I'm channeling my fear of poverty in a positive direction, obliging me to do things that will avoid this thing that I'm afraid of, i.e. being poor. And you can do the same thing. There are lots of things that you're afraid of, and you can use that fear to drive you, to motivate you, to push you to achieve things that perhaps you didn't think you could possibly achieve. But the fear pushed you. And that's a good thing. That's a positive thing now, isn't it? Of course it is. Having fear motivate you is a very, very positive thing. But having fear dominate you, having fear limit what you do, prevent you from achieving the things that you want, living the life that you want to lead, then fear can be your worst enemy. And this is what's happening on a society-wide level. Fear is making people just shut down and not try, not push themselves further. Fear, and now having fear being considered a virtue, makes people do horrible things. Fear is driving their actions. And when that happens, when your fear is driving your actions, you're only going to make horrible decisions. Because you're not going to be thinking in your long-term best interests. No. You're going to be thinking, how do I eliminate this feeling of fear? And you'll do anything, everything, no matter how awful, in order to eliminate this feeling of fear. And that is what is happening to our society. This feeling of fear, uncontrolled fear, this fear that is now a virtue, is making the people in the Western democracies throw away the most precious rights and privileges that we have in the West. Free speech, freedom of thought, freedom of assembly, all of these are being thrown away, tossed away, in order to pacify this feeling of fear, which is now a virtue. And see, since fear is now a virtue, there is no limit to how far you can go to stop fear. Anything is permitted, no matter how horrible. In Australia, they have concentration camps where they put people that are unvaccinated or who might be carrying COVID, concentration camps, over a disease where 99.98% of the people will survive it, no problem. And yet, they have people in concentration camps so that the rest of society isn't afraid. You see what happens? You see how horrible this is? And I don't even want to get started insofar as the issue of freedom of expression is concerned, where thoughts, counterfactual information is considered evil, wrong, and must be silenced. I mean, think of it. Think how insane it has become, where we are silencing people because we are afraid of what they say, and we are so trying to eliminate fear of all sorts that we are willing to silence people who are telling us the truth. How insane has our society become? And this is the reason, by the way, that I can't post this video publicly, because it'll probably get flagged. I mean, it's insane, but that's what's happening. Pointing out the fear that people are experiencing and the hysteria. This Dr. Malone recently talked about mass formation psychosis, right? Basically, mass hysteria. That's what it is, basically. It's fancy language for mass hysteria. The same shit that happened in Salem with the witch hunts and all the rest of it, right? That's what's happening in the West. And that is being purged from YouTube. Just that statement, that pointing out the fact that everybody has become hysterical, that is being purged and censored on YouTube. How insane! But that's what's happening. And it's all because of fear, because fear is now a virtue. When shit's happening quickly in the world and society and whatnot, it takes a while to sort of like figure it out. I mean, after the fact, I mean, you know, hindsight is 20/20. But while you're living it, it's kind of complicated sometimes. See? And see, I've always thought to myself that a lot of my videos are basically about tossing out ideas for both you and me to mull over and think about and try to figure out what the hell is happening in our world. This notion that fear has become a virtue, I only acquired it recently, like a couple of weeks ago. But in just these couple of weeks, all of a sudden things are incredibly clear. And I'm understanding why this headlong rush into totalitarianism, self-imposed totalitarianism. Fear has dominated the lives of everyone in the West. It's as simple as that. And so what you have to do, and what I'm certainly trying to do, is not fall prey to that fear. Now, I'm very lucky because I live in the ass end of the world, literally. I live in fucking eastern Ukraine, man. I mean, this is as far east as you can get in Europe, okay? And here in Kharkov, you know, none of this fear shit is going around. Nobody gives a fuck, right? And yeah, you're supposed to show certificates, but literally, I sort of like flash a piece of paper and they're like, yo, I'll go in. Nobody checks, nobody cares, because they know it's bullshit. Because here in a poor country, a poor society, they know, they understand what is really dangerous and what is just bullshit. And they know that this is all bullshit. But what's happening in the West is that the West is rich. Western Europe, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they're rich countries. And so they can afford a spell of hysteria. But the problem is that, see, this spell of hysteria, eventually all these countries will wake up. Eventually they'll wake up and say, what the hell were we doing? But the problem is that the damage that will be done to so many people, including potentially you, and that's the thing. And don't get me started on the whole vaccine thing. And the vaccine, as I've explained here in this video, now you understand the hysteria of why everybody has to be vaccinated. Vaccinated with something that is potentially lethal. There are no long-term studies about the vaccine. I hope I don't get banned for stating that because it's the truth. There are no long-term studies for this vaccine. So nobody knows the long-term effects. That's reason enough not to take something. Yeah, if you don't know what's going to happen to you in 10 years, don't fucking take it. You know what I'm saying? But hysteria, fear as a virtue, it's making people do crazy shit. And you're living in the West, you got to resist this shit. That's all I can tell you. You got to resist this shit and resist it in your own heart. Don't fall prey to this notion that fear is a virtue. It's not. It's a defect. Allowing yourself to be controlled by fear is the exact opposite of being a man. I've told you countless times in different videos and different platforms here on Patreon, on my CRP channel, my GL channel, I tell you all the time that the difference between a man and every other living creature on this earth, including all women and most other males of the Homo sapiens species, well, the difference is that men can experience an emotion but control it. Control it and not allow that emotion, however powerful, to control his actions. A man executes actions based on knowledge, experience, acquired knowledge, and the experiences of others. He uses reason, logic, rationality. Emotions can be a powerful thing, and a man knows this. He controls his emotions. But our society right now is encouraging everyone, including you, including men, to follow their fear and do whatever it takes to stop the fear. Don't fall for this trap. As always, I want to thank my Patreon subscribers for following me on this channel. And yeah, it's been a very interesting experience the last couple of years now, hasn't it? Yeah, I think we're going to have quite the rocky ride in 2022. And so, yeah, I just wanted to thank you and tell you that I'm going to continue to be posting videos every Wednesday and a Sunday broadcast, a weekly webinar, every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope I see you there, and I will catch you next time.